Hi everyone, welcome to the May edition of MedTech Mondays. For those, I think many of you will be joining us for, have joined us for more than one of these by now, so you may well know who I am, but I'm the Innovations Manager for the Medical Device Partnering Program. I've also previously worked as a mechanical design engineer in medical devices. Part of my role here with MDPP, I also work with the Australian National Fabrication Facility and also have a connection in with a couple of the MTP Connect grant programs, the Biomedical Translation Bridge Program and the Targeted Translation Research Accelerator. So have some interest in the topic of today, which is all about grant writing, both through the fact that we deal with a lot of companies that do great technology, and we'll sometimes get to see them when they're applying for their grants, and know that the technology and the grant writing doesn't always mean that they're translating. So we know the background, but sometimes possibly it isn't as well articulated as it could be. So just before we start, I'll just give you a very quick introduction to the Medical Device Partnering Program. So I think it's good to start with our vision, which is to help Australia become the fastest in the world at taking a medical device to turning it from an idea into a product on the market. And we do quite a few different things to help to bring those ideas to life. So we help to provide access to experts. We help to make sure that the ideas fit for purpose. We de-risk opportunities where possible, and we provide connections in with different groups, including providing the sort of a list of all these different bodies that do provide grants. And it's quite confusing, I think, for people when they're first starting out, because there's a lot of different programs with a lot of different acronyms, and it can be quite complicated. One of the very common things we hear at the early stage when people come to us is people saying we need money, and we sort of, with our program, we challenge that a little bit. I realize that we're talking about grants in this one, so a lot of people are looking for money, but the program that we offer, we're actually providing 250 hours of technical support and a 30-hour market report. So it costs $5,000 for a successful applicant to join the program. We don't take any IP. We offer a whole bunch of really useful and intelligent connections in with different people who can help people to develop that idea. And then that's the point where we help to connect people with future funding opportunities. But I guess our program, the idea is that we want to provide expertise rather than money, because we know when you're really just starting out with an idea and you're just trying to see if it actually physically works, often you're too early for some of those grant opportunities. So we can really provide a good springboard into helping people to do that. Here's a quick overview of our process. I won't go into too much detail, but essentially, if you've got an idea for a medical device, submit it through our website and we'll talk you through the whole process. So at that point, we'll launch into the panel session. So I'll just spend some time just to introduce all of our different panelists. So we'll start with Kirsten Halata. Kirsten, are you online? Happy to, yeah?
Yep.
See you there. So feel free to use as much or as little time as possible, but I'll give you 3 minutes to introduce yourself and accelerating commercialization.
Okay, so I'm a commercial facilitator for Commercialization Australia. We provide really advice, business development advice, commercialization advice for novel new technologies that you're trying to bring to the market. We're also connected to a grant, so we provide both advice as well as financial help. And the program's really aimed at helping products to get to market that, you've finished your R&D, you've got a very basic prototype that might be, held together with sticky tape and blue tack, but it shows that it works. If you've proven that it works technically, but you now need to get to the next place to have a commercial outcome, which could be a capital raise, it could be a product on the market, some next step to get your functioning prototype to actually, being able to progress it closer to your end user. And And that's what we provide advice with. So it's a technology that has a little bit, still too risky for investors. So we usually come in before you would do your Series A capital raise. We can talk more in the question time about that. But we're really there to bridge that very small gap that we call the valley of death, really, between completing R&D. Is that it?
No, sorry. I did warn you that every time the clock fails,
Okay.
You have more time.
Yeah, I just said that my background is in a federal government program. We've got people all over Australia with different backgrounds. My background I'm pretty broad, but it's probably mostly MedTech, biotech, a bit of ag tech. Studied viticulture, biophysics at Flinders, worked in pharma and startup biotech companies, and I've seen lots of different technologies. So that gives you a bit of
what were the size of the grants available through accelerating commercialisation?
Oh, I should have said that. Really, it's up to $1 million. If you're for university tech transfer offices or research institutions, it's up to 500,000 now. If you're sort of at the point of just about ready to spin it out of the university, and $1 million for GST registered companies, and it's a minimum of 50,000. But I'll say that is probably not worth applying for less than 100, because it's a prolonged process to actually get the grant, and it's probably, considering the effort involved, it's probably not worth it for anything under 100,000, we typically say, but there is a lot of value in that process. So I'll say that too.
Yeah, and it's a great program. So a lot of the people who've finished with MBPP have gone through accelerating commercialisation, and I think it works really well. And the fact that you can sort of take two chunks and tailor it to what you need at the time, I think works really well.
That's right. And look, to get a $1 million grant is quite difficult. You really have to have, tick every box, and you have to be a superstar, and people get them all the time. Every 6 weeks, the minister roughly announces new grantees, and it's quite a prestigious program. But sometimes it's better to do it in 2 steps. Ask for a little amount to get to your first commercial outcome, prove like a basic prototype, and then ask for a second grant to fill that $1 million, and that kind of de-risks it for our committee as well. It's just, so there are that's why you need to work with people like me, because we help you work out, what's a good strategy going forward.
Great, thanks, Kirsten. Next, we've got Rebecca Barnes from KPMG. Hi, Rebecca. I'll see if the clock works any better this time, but no promises.
I don't think I'll need the full 3 minutes. So yeah, my background is actually in engineering. So I come from a civil enviro background, water and wastewater system. So I don't really have a nexus to the medical sector. Although I have come out of the international aid sector too, where I've spent time and have a doctorate looking at water supply for developing regions. So that's my kind of nexus to the medical sector. I now work at KPMG. I've been at KPMG for about 7 years here in Adelaide. I'm part of the Accelerating Business Growth team. And what we do is really help companies to access government funding and to think strategically about the federal and state funding that they are going to want to access along their growth journey. Outside of work, I sit on the board of a couple of not-for-profits. One of them is involved in drilling water wells in Solomon Islands, so that's where I get my water engineering fix. The KPMG team that I'm part of has, there's about 8 of us here in South Australia. There's probably about 60 of us nationally. And a big part of what I do during the day is sit down with, I spend a lot of time with tech companies. So in a range of sectors, ag tech, med tech, mining, manufacturing, sit down with them and say, kind of tell me about your future growth. Tell me about your pipeline projects. Tell me about your IP. And let's see if we can map out funding opportunities along the way and help you to access those. So I prepare a lot of business cases and project plans and help to prepare, economic impact assessments and the kinds of documents that help companies to get into that funding stream. And obviously I write a lot of grant applications, which is why I'm here.
And even though we're not quite to the question stage yet, I wondered if I could ask you a question. Do you ever get people who come to you who perhaps made mistakes in their process so far, and if you could rewind, it'd be really useful to be able to tell them, don't apply for that grant yet, save it for this one. There's another earlier stage one you should have applied for.
Absolutely. So yeah, sometimes we have to break hard news to them saying, if you'd come to me a year ago, we could have done this. But, you know, a big part of what I do is let's see if we can, for example, draw up a timeline of what's going to happen for you in the next 3 years and where these funding opportunities sit. You know, you've got biomedical translation bridge, it's really early stage, and we'll take you through to proof of concept, but you've got accelerating commercialization that'll pick you up at that proof of concept stage and bring you through to first sales. So it is about helping companies with the timing as well as the applications.
Great. Well, there you go. I've never seen the timer get to the end, so it stopped on 1 second apparently. Thanks for that, Rebecca. So next we have Rui Hu from Flinders University, part of the grant writing team. Hi, Rui.
Hear me?
Yeah, over to you for your introduction.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Stephen. So my name is Rui, and I'm the MRFF manager at Flinders University. So very similar to what Rebecca speaks about. She supports businesses, but I support researchers, academics in the university in developing proposals, positioning for funding, whether it's through the Commonwealth, state or philanthropic, all the way to international agencies as well. But my priority in Flinders is focusing on the MRFF grants. Just a little bit of my background. I'm a biomedical engineer by training, and I was a researcher at the Max Planck Institute and also at the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology in Germany. 8 years ago, I probably decided to pull the plug and leave academia and jump across to the other side of the fence to support researchers to get funding. So I've been a grant strategist at different universities, mainly in New South Wales in the last 8 years. In University of New South Wales, University of Sydney, and more recently, I moved to Flinders last October. I've worked across many different areas of research, from telecommunications, 5G, 6G, Internet of Things, food and ag tech, biomed tech, defense, drug discovery, artificial intelligence, data science, mining, I think waste transformation. So a variety of things. And I also work with social sciences, historians, to pull together applications ranging from 50K all the way to $35 million. So my current role right now at Flinders Uni, as I just described, is really about developing grant strategies together with researchers, research institutes within the university, as well as for the university, to position ourselves for future funding, to grow our research portfolio and enterprise, while supporting the individuals to put together bids, and also to build capacity in grant writing and grants percentage.
Thanks, Rui. I had one other question for you. Does every grant get submitted on the day of the deadline, or how often do they go early?
Yeah, it's very rare that the grant gets submitted before the deadline. That's very uncommon. But usually I'll have to say the successful ones is the one that we work closely with, and there are a lot of iterations in sharpening the pitch and the communication, and also addressing all the gaps and problems that are existing in all aspects of the grant.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rui. Rebecca, if you'd like to turn your video back on now. So I can see someone's already submitted a question, but For those who don't know, if you just find there should be a Q&A box, so you should be able to submit your questions. You can submit them with your name or anonymously. It's entirely up to you. You may or may not be able to, so usually we can upvote. I think it looks like you might not be able to upvote the questions this time, but we'll try and get through all the questions that come through. So we'll start with the first one. So perhaps I'll go to Rebecca for the first question. So what makes a good grant application? I know it's a very broad question, but.
It's a great question. I guess top tips. A clear narrative. So the assessor needs to be able to get their head around the project. Impacts of the project that are articulated, particularly in the commercial grants that I work with, impacts that are articulated beyond the applicant. So you have to kind of think about what is it that the government or the funding body is looking for? What do they want to be able to get out of it? And that might be impacts on the economy. It might be impacts on the health of Australians. It might be impacts on, vulnerable people groups or cost reduction across the industry. So a good application will incorporate those broader benefits as opposed to just this is what it's going to do for our sales. A good application addresses every part of the merit criteria. Often you'll find that merit criteria are long questions, multi-part questions. You might say merit criterion 1 is worth 50 points, but actually it's kind of got 5 subpoints in there, and probably each one of those subpoints is worth 10 points each. So you really got to make sure that you're answering every part of every merit criterion. And a good grant application demonstrates the capability of your team. So it demonstrates, if it's a commercialization grant, for example, that we've got people on board who know how to get something into market. If it's a research grant, we've got people on board that are at the cutting edge of this sector.
So that just got me thinking. For people who apply to lots of grants, I know from where I've been that you sometimes can tell that people have copy and pasted blocks of information. Is there a way of making it easier so that there's not so much work in each grant? Or is it really, if you really want a grant, you've really got to focus in and make sure you're addressing the criteria properly?
It is a bit of a trap. Certainly, a first pass at a grant application, you'll be pulling in paragraphs from past applications or paragraphs from documentation that you've got on hand. But to Rui's point earlier, successful applications have those iterations where once you've got that raw data in there, you're really refining the narrative so that you're nailing with specifics and examples and details every element of that merit criterion within character count. So it is more than just pulling in information from other documentation that you've got available.
And I guess the best copy and pasting is the one where the assessor hasn't been able to tell. So the ones that I've seen are probably the ones where it's more obvious. Kirsten, I thought I might go to you for the next question. So there's a question here about whether people can apply to, and this applies, I guess, to accelerating commercialization, but also to any other grant. If they've applied to the grant and they were unsuccessful, can they apply again? So I guess this comes from whether people are worried that they only get one shot and they don't want to apply and be turned down and lose the only opportunity they've had.
Well, I'd say, first of all, I think it's always better to come and talk to us. So if you're not sure, come and talk to us. Put in what we call, our expression of interest has been renamed to an AC Guide application. So you can find that on our portal. And I would really strongly recommend putting that in because even if it's early, it gives us a chance to help guide you on how to get ready. So part of my job is really to help people get ready for a full application. Right, we look at the AC Guide applications, look at the merit, and then we have a meeting with the applicant and really talk about, okay, here are the strengths and weaknesses of your application. This is what you need to work on. You're too early. Come back at this particular time. So we work really, really hard. We won't invite somebody to put in a full application unless we have some degree of confidence that they're going to be successful, that they've got a good shot. because there's a lot of work involved, both for the applicant and for us. We do a lot of due diligence on the applications, and we really don't want them to go through, we make recommendations. We can't tell somebody you can't go through, but we, make strong recommendations if we think this is going to be competitive or not. So you get a very good idea from us before you actually submit on where you're going to stand. And there's obviously no guarantee, but, that's probably that I would really recommend following that guidance. And then if if we recommend go ahead, we think you've got a good shot, but for whatever reason, there's a committee in Canberra that looks at the application, and sometimes it happens, I think about 60% of the ones that go to committee do get funding. So, certainly there's a chance of failure. For whatever reason, then you can't resubmit. If there's something, just a small thing, or if they just put in a bit of evidence on this or letter of support, then sometimes they will let you resubmit that application, but it's rare. So you do, but it's our job sometimes we work on those applications for 6 months to a year to get them right. And it's our job to help people get them right before they go in.
And then I guess even for the people who weren't successful, just to work through that process is a good education anyway for any other grant applications they do.
Yes, it is, but we certainly don't want to put in a full, that's where we can help. We provide guidance, and that's why it's not just a grant program, right? We provide guidance, but we will try to, if we don't think it's going to be successful, we'll try to do that without actually making you go through the whole application process, but you'll still get that guidance, and you get benefit out of the connections that we have. We try to connect people with other people in the industry or other companies or investors sometimes. So we really try to give people sort of a bit of a value added no if it's a no.
Great, thanks, Kirsten. Next question, I'll go to you, Rui. So we've got a question from Carolyn saying, what's the ideal balance between technical and strategic focus in an applicational pitch?
I think that is a very good question, and they are both equally extremely important in any application. So the strategic side of things is really about the big picture positioning of what your problem is, what the market need is, what's the impact, what is the rationale to do the work, why is it, it's basically pitching for why. When it comes to the technical, it's about the how and what you'll be doing and how you will be doing it. And so a lot of clarity around the pathway, the recipes, the steps will be very, very helpful for the panel that's usually comprised of experts and non-experts. So you do not want to risk having the comment from someone who is an expert saying that I don't know how this will be done in 3 years' time. So that's a very, very common comment that we often receive if there is no concrete and robust plan. In terms of the language that's used to write the technical and the strategic pitch in an application, I would say it really depends on who the audience will be, whether it's people from the government or people who are researchers or from business. That's something you need to write for your audience. And yeah, so writing for the audience, and also in terms of the granularity of the plan or the methodology or the approach that you are trying to undertake, it really goes down to what type of the grants you are applying for. So depending on whether it's a research industry center or whether it's a CRC pay type application or a MedTech voucher or like the TTRA that MDPP is running, it all comes down to what the guidelines are and also how much detail is needed. So there's always a word limit, and depending whether it's a project or a program or an enterprise proposal, the granularity would be quite different.
And I think it's worth remembering as well that the assessors are going to look at potentially 10, 20, 30 applications in some of the MTP Connect programs anyway. So too much technical detail, it's hard work to read through that. So you really want to be really concise with when you're trying to get your point across. I can imagine it's really challenging, and particularly in a research environment. It's one of the things that I have definitely noticed, that there's that transition between research grants and commercialization grants where you don't need as much technical and you need more commercial. And
absolutely, and signpost as much as you can. I mean, like, you know, people may not understand the technical details, but they want to know what the purpose is.
Yeah, great, thank you, Rui. Rebecca, I seem to be going around in a circle, so I'll come back to you. The next question we have is, how accurate do my project schedule and budget estimations need to be?
Yeah. Most grants will require a rationale or quotes, particularly for the major items in a budget. You typically need to be able to provide at least a basis for that calculation. So I saw one recently where the budget was round figures to the nearest million, with no rationale sitting beneath it. And I said, look, that's just not going to fly. So you do need a moderate level of detail. It does vary a little bit depending on the quantum of funding that you're asking for and the size of the project. The greater the project, typically the more detail is required. But yeah, for the major items, you usually need to be able to support that with quotes or some kind of rationale or basis. I mean, budgets change, and everybody understands that budgets change, but it is worthwhile knowing as well that if your budget is going to change from what you have submitted in an application, particularly if the budget decreases, then there's a high likelihood you won't actually get the full amount of funding that you have applied for.
How about on the project plan side of things as well? So
yeah.
Just thinking some of the applications that we've seen before where the project plan, you know, you're looking for a project that really advances the applicant's idea, and having a really good project plan that clearly is well defined and clearly articulates how when they get to the end of this project, they're going to be in a better place than when they started. And it's surprising how often we've seen applications where it's not really clear exactly what they're going to achieve through that process or whether they were going to be doing that anyway. Yeah, the value, that's the value add.
Absolutely. That's it's very true. And having a project plan typically contains some key elements. There are plenty of templates available for a project plan online. You're looking at what's the project schedule, what's the project budget, what are the project risks, how do I evaluate success in this project, what are my project reporting lines? And if you can kind of nail those with specifics, what it does is give an assessor a sense that the project is in safe hands. The last thing that a funding body wants is to give money to somebody and have the project kind of fall apart because the governance isn't there for it. So a project plan is there to say, we've thought about all the governance issues associated with this project, and you can trust us to deliver this on time and on budget. So yes, that does require a level of detail in a project plan.
Great, thank you. Next question going around to Kirsten. We've had a question. Some people say it would be very helpful if the grant body or panel know you or your entity to put a face on the name. How true is this? Not sure.
I have to say that's not true, but I mean, I honestly will say that I don't think I certainly don't think that's true for grants in general, and certainly not for AC. We don't even have a pool of money, a defined pool of money. We basically fund ideas that are great ideas, and if it's a good idea, it will get up. Or if there's a real market, if it ticks all the boxes, I don't think. I mean, we look at team and who are the people and what are their strengths and things like that, but it doesn't matter whether we've known them before they apply or not. I really don't think that makes any difference.
And I think anyone who's been involved with any of the programs would know that the people involved are all excellent. They're very good at what they do. So I think, I agree that all the programs that we've been involved with, definitely wouldn't say that it makes any difference. And a lot of people do reapply to lots of different programs, and it's always on merit.
Thanks.
Absolutely.
I mean, I would say, I think, you know, there are some incentives for women founders. That's probably the only difference. And that's something that we're trying to encourage, obviously, because there aren't very many startups with women founders. That might be the only differentiator, really. But even in that case, you know, you're not going to get funded unless you've got a great idea.
Well, I've got you because there's another question directly for you. Someone asks whether so it says, Kirsten, is this the only funding available to support spin-outs? The matching contribution seems a bit high for universities.
Well, I would say it's not high for universities. In fact, I mean, universities, we typically only work with companies that have an annual turnover of less than 20 million, and universities have more than that. So it's I don't think that even for universities, I think for the tech transfer offices, well, it depends. Maybe I shouldn't speak for all, but I would hope that if they have a good commercial arm and an IP that they've paid for, that they would then, if they have a chance of getting commercialization, a grant, obviously they've also got connections. There are lots of ways to do this. I'm assuming they would have connections to investors. If it's a good idea, honestly, I think in this environment, especially seed funding is. I was in a conference just recently that showed, there's quite a bit of seed funding actually available. I don't think there's any reason why something that's commercially viable wouldn't fly or be supported. That's my experience.
Great, thanks. Rui, we'll come to you for the next one. So question on what does in-kind support encompass and how do I allocate it accurately?
In-kind support is basically, it's not a cash contributions, but it's an existing cost that's being borne by the partners or your own organization. So what the panel and funding bodies are often looking at are what can they leverage in funding this application. So they are really trying to see if there's genuine commitment from all the parties involved in the application. It could be the people, it could be the infrastructure, it could be data, it could be any networks that you can access to. It can be a variety of things that you can be very creative in looking out for. So some of the very good applications that I've seen is really trying to capture all the different costing, indirect costs that is genuine to demonstrate that all the parties are supporting that application. And for the funder perspective, it's just value for money.
It's interesting because one thing I've seen before is people quoting in kind, but then putting those people within a project plan as if they're going to be reimbursed by the project, which is not really in kind because you're going to fund them. So I think, yeah, it's a really, really good point. And I think it's something that people need to be really careful of. The whole point of an in-kind contribution is that it is something that the organization is giving to the project for free, effectively, exactly, and not expecting to be reimbursed for.
Exactly. And free can be in different forms and shapes.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Rebecca, I'll come to you for the next question. So are there any tips on how to sell your project in a grant application without over-promising on things that you can't deliver?
Great question. My policy on that is let the specifics, let the examples carry the weight of the argument. So beware of kind of over salesy language. You don't need to kind of approach a grant application by saying, we're going to bring cutting edge technology that's going to transform the medical devices landscape in Australia and create a lot of jobs, because anybody can say that. It's salesy and it's generic. If you can use metrics and specifics, then that carries the weight of the argument. And if you're, I see the point there about not over-promising on things you can't deliver. If you are unsure of your metrics, you can use words like "we anticipate that," or "it has been modeled that," draft modeling suggests, but use those details and those specifics rather than coming across as overly salesy and persuasive and generic.
Great, thank you. Kirsten, I'll come to you. We've got a question here that's specifically around your program again. So asking whether the Entrepreneurs Program or Accelerating Commercialization accepts cash contributions for things that we have already paid for, which I think is a university, and investments made into the tech by the university.
Well, maybe the best way to explain this is that what we fund as projects, right? We fund, we don't fund sort of operating expenses or working capital. We provide funds to do a particular project. And so if your project is to, let's say, 3D print a number of prototypes and then get them out to the market, we will, it's probably not for past expenses so much. It would be a new project that you're starting that you're not already doing, getting it to the next stage. And what we fund is anything related to the project. For example, if you're putting on a business development manager, we would fund only the time that they spend on that particular project and, commercializing that product. Or if you're buying some services or infrastructure, it always has to relate to the project, if that makes sense. So we don't sort of just go out and buy equipment. That we only fund the portions as they relate to the project.
Perfect, thank you. And maybe I might come to you, Kirsten, for the next question as well, because the other two are probably both professional grant writers in a sense. So we have a question, when should I bring in a professional grant writer for a grant application?
Okay, actually, I'll just say one more thing about that. Cash.
Yeah.
I mean, so when you put in the grant, you actually do have to have some proof that you will have that cash in the bank. So, it's got to actually be there. So, it can't really be, because if it's something you've already spent money on, it's almost like in kind again, right? Yeah. So the second question, professional grant writer, that really depends. I've got mixed feelings and experiences with grant writers. Some are fantastic. I would say it really depends on the applicant's ability. I mean, if you're going to use, sometimes it can be great to use a grant writer, especially if English is not your first language and you might need help with that, or and I understand if you're time poor, but what I would say is that you've got to work really, really closely with them and choose grant writers that understand your area of expertise. I've seen, a few applications that have been, like Rebecca said, sort of salesy, and when I'm reading them, I can tell that the grant writer doesn't actually understand the technology or that industry sector. So you can't kind of just go, here's some money, write the grant for me, goodbye. You really need to be involved. And I actually go a step further, and in all of my sort of conference calls and feedback on drafts, I won't just talk to the grant writer. I always sort of insist on the company or the person who owns it to also be there. I think that's really important. If you want to be, if you're applying for a significant grant, I think you need to also, be working on it and actually invest that time. So yeah, be careful of, picking a grant writer that really understands it. If they don't understand it, then you vary the degree of how much you actually work with them. You've just got to make sure that you're doing it together properly.
All right, thank you. Rebecca, Rui, did you want to add anything to that one?
Yes, I agree with Kirsten, and I have mixed experience with grant writers as well. I think they can be very expensive. So I guess one of the key things that you would like to consider is to make an evaluation how competitive you are before jumping into engaging with them and going through all the process, because it could be tens of thousands of dollars. And I totally agree with what Kirsten said, working very closely with the grant writer and actually producing the first draft and have the grant writer to finesse it and reshape things. And that's the best experience that I have, and it works well in that sense.
Yeah, and I would actually, just to add to that, I think, talking to us directly first is good, because I'll tell you, worst case scenario, and I have come across this, is that, somebody really wants to earn some money and they tell you, oh, I've had lots of successful AC grant applications I've written, I can do this for you, and they sell themselves, and then sometimes that goes really badly because our feedback might not be favorable, and that's where we've had experiences where grant writers don't want us to talk to the client, and it's not good. So you have to think about what sometimes what people's motivations are, and maybe work with somebody that comes recommended, and there are some really good ones, but there are also a few pitfalls.
Rebecca, I think it's fair to hear your take on this as well.
Yeah, look, no, I think what Kirsten and Rui have said is very fair. I mean, a good grant writer will be really upfront with you about how competitive they think you are, and give you honestly all the information that you need to be able to assess whether or not it is worth your while diving into that engagement. We often say to people, grant writers will be there to fill a gap related to either capability or capacity. So you're asking yourself the question, firstly, capability-wise, do I have the skills within my organisation that are required? And those skills are, I need to be able to write well. I need to understand what the funding body is after and be confident of aligning my content with that. I need the skills, I need project management skills, because often an application involves multiple stakeholders. Often you're working to a finite time frame, less so with accelerating commercialization, but a lot of grant applications have it, you've got to have it in by 4:30 p.m. Australian Central Standard Time on this date. And there's quite a project management exercise to pull together all your letters of support. Make sure your individual who's preparing the budget has discussed that with the individual that's doing the merit criteria. And, so do you have that capability within your organization, or do you need that gap filled? And the other question is, do you have the capacity, particularly for those tight timeframes? Do you have the capacity on top of your BAU to be preparing this application? And if the answer to both of those is yes, it's probably not worth your while engaging with a professional grant writer, although sometimes as a review function, a fresh set of eyes can actually, at the end of that process, just in the couple of days before lodgement, just help to finesse the application.
Yeah, great answer. I think that was, really good point. So next question, we have, at which time during the, at what time should I start applying for grants during the commercialization process? So perhaps Kirsten, will start with you on that one.
Do you want me to talk specifically about AC? I'm guessing. For AC, it's really when you feel like you're getting close to having that functional prototype, when you're getting close to having completed R&D, where you've sort of proven it to yourself, it works, but you haven't proven it to the market yet, and tested it in the market. Yeah,
and maybe Rui or Rebecca, whichever you think you might be able to add a little bit more onto that one.
Yeah, I think it is worthwhile mapping it out. I think I referred to this a little in my introduction, that we work with a number of companies where we actually kind of say, okay, for your next 3 years, what's in the pipeline for you? What's your growth trajectory? What's your story going to be? And look, there are probably 5 primary funding avenues that you align with. Let's pop them on your timeline. Because I think, to use the example that I called out earlier, you've got biomedical translation bridge, and it's going to be pretty early stage. Accelerating commercialization will come later. R&D tax will be annual, so let's put that in there. So it is worthwhile, mapping that out on a grant by grant basis.
And I guess the answer is, in terms of what time, it's that you can almost, there's grants for every stage, and really you can be pretty early stage and start looking at
I guess I'd add the caveat that you need to be at a stage where you can put enough definition around milestones and a budget. So we do get, companies coming to us saying, I want to apply for a grant. I think I'm going to invent this. And we say, well, you're not yet at a stage of actually being able to map out a budget and milestones and who your team is. You need to have that level of detail to be able to apply.
Great, thank you. Next question, how does the importance of the team or track record weight in the grant reviewing process? Are the applicants with strong background or reputation likely to be more successful? Perhaps Rui, we'll start with you for that question.
Yeah, I think like the first question when this session started was about what makes a good grant application. And I think one of the key highlights was about the team. So the team track record is often very important in the assessment process. Of course, good track record, strong reputation people, I would say it does have an advantage, but it comes back to what's the criteria of the grant. And it's all about the track record is about assessing the feasibility, whether the team can pull together and deliver the project. So as the project lead, you may have some gaps in your capabilities. That's when you try to pull in other people to fill the gap and also ensure that there's great confidence in project delivery. So, and from the investor's perspective or the funding body's perspective, it's about the best idea and the best team. So it's who you can find to who is the best to deliver the project. It's often the case.
Great. I guess it ties in a little bit with one of the questions earlier where you get your project plan and you say what you're going to deliver, and the first thing you're going to do is look and see, can these people actually deliver this? So if they've got a good team, at least you know that they're capable. Did anyone else want to add anything onto that question?
For us, that's actually the merit criteria that we weight the heaviest. So team is actually one of the most important things. And it doesn't mean you can't have gaps. It means you have to know what your gaps are and explain how you're going to fill them.
Great, good to know.
And can I add on one point is around the historical track record as well. The partners and yourself and has a track record in working together. It's also a key evidence that to provide to the funding bodies to give more confidence. It's not like we just came together for this grant and yesterday.
Yeah, and sometimes it's surprisingly easy to tell when a team has worked well together. Even just from a grant application, you can quite easily tell when it's been cobbled together just for the grant.
Yeah, absolutely.
So next question we have is, how can I hit the ground running after a successful grant application, or I guess successfully receiving funding through a grant? Maybe Rebecca, would you like to talk to this one?
Sure. Yeah, look, I think it's worthwhile starting off by you'll have a grant agreement signed and there will be milestones. Sorry, just lost my earpiece. There'll be milestones associated with that and reporting requirements associated with that. So have that mapped out and then gather your team and just be really aware of what it is you've submitted in terms of milestones and budget, so you can kind of stay on track, because technically you've got this grant agreement signed and you're not actually the funding department is not bound to give you the funds if you're kind of wandering off track in terms of your project plan. So I guess I'd say just start by getting your team together, being really aware of the milestones and the budget that you've submitted and what those reporting requirements are. And milestone 1, go for it.
Is it fair to say sometimes people panic when they have a successful grant application? Suddenly realize that they're actually going to have to do everything they've promised to deliver?
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe that's just me.
No, absolutely. And that is something that we specifically try and walk clients through that awareness right at the beginning of the application, just walk them through the realities of grants are not free money.
No.
There's a commitment required. Is this really what you want to do? Because if you're successful, then you're going to be somewhat bound to that. So yeah,
there's a lot of reporting to do along the way as well. It's regular check-ins, so there's people keeping on top of everything you do. So it's not easy. It's not hand over the money and off you go, see you in 2 years' time. Kirsten, anything you wanted to add to that question?
Yeah, I would just say when you get the money, that's just the start of the relationship really with your commercial facilitator, like with me, because we're really there to hold their hand all the way through. We will, visit them, look at their progress. We will look at the reports. We will continue to sort of mentor if we can and give them connections. So we stay really involved throughout the whole process. So it's a journey, not sort of like, here's the money, come back when you're done.
And that's probably a side of grants that people don't always appreciate, is that, and all the MTP Connect grants are the same. You do get a mentor, and it's really useful to have someone to bounce ideas off and to be able to help. And particularly the space that you work in, where it's fairly early stage people who need some business advice. And the projects that have come through MDPP and then gone on to accelerating commercialization have really benefited then from having someone that helps to sort of explain the business side to them once they finish.
Yeah, well, we've just had one of your, one of the, Neomorph who came through your program. They've just finished a CEO masterclass. So there are lots of different, or they might still be doing it, but there are lots of different programs that we offer throughout that once you're in our program, we actually give you access to as they come up. And when you finish, you can also, there are different parts of the entrepreneurs program. So you automatically qualify to go into the growth program. So, I worked with Anne Collins, who was a growth facilitator the other day, and handed a grantee that finished their project with us onto her. And she's then going to help them, with the next stage. So, we don't want to just hand out money and then see what happens and throw it at a wall. But we really, you do get a lot of support. And even after that, there might be other programs you're eligible for.
In a way, we call them grants, but they are investments, because it's not just money, it's a whole bunch of other stuff that goes into it as well. Rui, I might come to you on the next question. What's the best way to manage IP ownership between partners in a consortium?
Okay. The first thing I think is to talk to the tech transfer or your patent attorneys to understand how to structure the IP management plan. There are two key things that are really important. It's to identify all the relevant background IPs and also identify all the project IPs, which is what's going to be the outputs of coming from the project, and who is going to own it and how decision making is being made. What's the decision process like? And so it can be very complex because when you come into starting at the project, who owns what, everyone is bringing something to the table. And so making sure that there is an agreement in place that it's being shared at this stage, and going forward how things, and you want to protect whoever has a commercial interest in it, and confidentiality agreement in place. All sorts of contracts pre-application, I would say, arrangements or agreements need to be in place. And it's often a breaking point for an application if the IP arrangement is unclear about who is going to take over and have the taking the lead to commercialize something, and how does other parties benefit or support that.
Right. I know from personal experience, I've been involved in a project where it wasn't well thought out at the beginning, and we've later in the project sort of had to pick through, and it's created a whole lot of animosity between the partners in the project, and it's kind of sort of not held the project back, but it's been a big elephant in the room the whole time that wasn't addressed properly at the start. So I think, yeah, very good point. Yeah,
and it takes time to negotiate all the terms and conditions. it's not, and what I see often is people run out of time because there's a deadline for submission, and all they have included is just IP principles, which is very high level, very generic, encapsulates everything. But again, coming back to the details of the more specific you can be about how, what are the key outputs, IP is actually an output, how that's being managed. And not to forget conflict of interest and how do you manage that in that process.
Great. Thanks, Rory. Well, I think we're just about out of time now, so I think we'll finish it here. So just really want to say thank you to everyone for all your contributions. I think it's really interesting because you're working slightly different areas, slightly different backgrounds. But I think this is such an important piece that people don't really appreciate, and having been on sort of both sides of it and seeing some of the applications come in, I think there is never going to be too much information or guidance or help for people applying for grants, because we can only be better, I think is fair to say. But yes, again, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. For everyone watching on your laptops or computers in the office, please, if you want to get in touch with any of our presenters today, their email addresses are on the screen, but we can send through the contact details, so please get in touch. And I think probably one of the overwhelming things that's come out today is, if you're not sure, speak to someone and ask them and get some advice. It's always free to chat, and I think every grant program would always encourage you to get in touch and speak with them before applying if you're uncertain. Yeah, great. All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Steve.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.